Millionaire CEO sees his first love at his engagement, then discovers a shocking truth. The crystal chandelier sparkled above the dance floor as guests clinked glasses in celebration. Greg, the billionaire CEO, stood beside his fiancée, Chloe, their engagement the talk of the evening. He should have been happy. This was the life he had built, the future he had chosen. But then, his eyes locked onto a woman standing near the garden's edge. Alexandra. The air left his lungs. His first love, the woman he let go, the one he never truly forgot. She turned, their gazes colliding, a flash of shock, a flicker of recognition, and then, the unspoken past crashed into the present. The music faded in his ears. The weight of his engagement ring suddenly felt heavier. Had he made the worst mistake of his life? Gregory Hayes built his empire with precision. His success, his engagement, his future all meticulously planned. But when Alexandra, his college sweetheart, unexpectedly appears at his engagement party, the carefully constructed life he built begins to crack. Their unexpected reunion stirs old emotions, unresolved heartbreak, and a question he never dared to ask. Did he choose the wrong woman? Chloe, his ambitious and elegant fiancée, senses the shift. She isn't about to let go of a billionaire without a fight. As tensions rise and secrets surface, Greg finds himself torn between duty and desire. In a battle between his past and his future, his heart and his legacy, Greg must make an impossible choice before it's too late. A gripping love story filled with passion, betrayal, and redemption, because sometimes, the love you left behind is the one you were meant to fight for. What if the one who changed your life forever was the person you least expected? A powerful CEO who has everything except love. A woman fighting against fate, struggling to survive. Their worlds should never collide, but destiny has other plans. When power meets vulnerability, when a CEO falls for someone society deems unworthy, can love rewrite the rules of success and sacrifice? Or will ambition, secrets, and betrayal tear them apart? A past too haunting to forget, a secret too dangerous to reveal, a love too unstoppable to deny. If you believe in love beyond limits, don't forget, like this video to experience more captivating CEO love stories. Comment below. Can love conquer ambition and power? Subscribe to CEO love stories and never miss the next thrilling romance. A new chapter unfolds. Under the delicate glow of string lights, the engagement party was in full swing. Guests mingled over champagne and soft laughter rippled through the lush garden. The evening was warm but not stifling, and a light breeze carried the scent of roses through the air. Chloe and Greg, the happy couple, made their rounds, hand in hand, greeting friends and family who had gathered to celebrate their upcoming wedding. It was a picturesque scene, the kind of elegant event one might expect from a couple who seemed to have it all. Alexandra stood on the fringes of the crowd, holding a flute of sparkling wine. She had arrived early at Chloe's request, her best friend since college, and had promised to help with last-minute preparations. Now, as the party moved into full swing, her work was done, and she was left to simply enjoy the festivities. Yet she couldn't shake the faint, nervous energy that had clung to her all day. This night marked more than just a milestone for Chloe and Greg. For Alexandra, it was a reminder of the years that had passed, of the paths they had all taken since their carefree college days. Chloe had risen quickly through the ranks of her field, now running her own design firm, while Greg had built a reputation as a leading architect in the city. Alexandra was proud of her friend's success, but she couldn't help feeling like she was still figuring out her own place in the world. She had a steady job in marketing, a decent apartment in the city, and a handful of hobbies to keep her busy. But sometimes, when the evenings grew quiet, she wondered if she was truly happy, or just going through the motions. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft clink of glasses and the gentle murmur of conversation around her. The event's formalities had concluded, and guests were now free to relax, talk, and wander the beautifully lit grounds. Alexandra took a sip of her wine, allowing herself to appreciate the moment. The garden was stunning, rows of carefully manicured hedges, towering trees adorned with fairy lights, and a central fountain that glistened under the soft glow. It was the perfect setting for a celebration of love. As she scanned the crowd, her eyes landed on Chloe and Greg near the center of the garden. They were laughing together, their joy evident in every gesture. Alexandra smiled to herself. They deserved this happiness. Chloe had been there for her through so much, through late-night study sessions, breakups, career uncertainties, and everything in between. Seeing her best friend so radiant made Alexandra's heart swell with pride and love. Still, a lingering pang of wistfulness tugged at her. It wasn't that she was unhappy for Chloe, far from it. But watching her best friend step into a new chapter of her life made Alexandra acutely aware of her own still unwritten pages. She wasn't sure what she wanted. Exactly. A new job? A new city? A new relationship? The answer seemed frustratingly out of reach. She shook off the thoughts and turned her attention back to the garden. It was no use dwelling on questions she couldn't answer tonight. Instead, she resolved to focus on the beauty of the moment, the warmth of the gathering, and the fact that she was surrounded by people who cared about her. She was here for Chloe, and that was enough. Her gaze drifted across the crowd again, and she took in the sea of unfamiliar faces. Most of the attendees were from Chloe and Greg's professional circles, colleagues, clients, and a few family members she hadn't met before. Alexandra assumed she wouldn't know many people beyond their small circle of friends. Yet as her eyes roamed, she caught sight of someone who made her pause. He was standing near the edge of the garden, partly obscured by a line of twinkling lights strung between two trees. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, and he had a commanding presence that set him apart from the rest of the crowd. Alexandra couldn't see his face clearly, but something about his stance, his silhouette, triggered a memory she hadn't visited in years. Her breath caught. It couldn't be. She shifted slightly, trying to get a better view. And then he turned, just enough for her to see his profile, the strong jawline, the slightly wavy hair that was now a touch shorter than she remembered, and the same confident tilt of his head that had once made her heart race. Lucas. The name echoed in her mind, carrying a flood of emotions she thought she had long since buried. It had been 7 years since she'd last seen him. 7 years since their paths had diverged so abruptly, leaving behind an unresolved mix of love, regret, and unanswered questions. And now, against all odds, he was here. Alexandra felt a wave of conflicting emotions, shock, disbelief, a flicker of joy, and a sudden, sharp ache in her chest. She had often wondered what had become of Lucas, where life had taken him after they went their separate ways. She had imagined him in distant cities, building a life entirely removed from her own. Yet here he was, standing no more than 20 feet away, as though the universe had decided to close the loop on their unfinished story. For a moment, she couldn't move. She just stared, her glass of wine forgotten in her hand. Did he see her? Did he recognize her? She wasn't sure if she wanted him to. Part of her wanted to turn and disappear into the crowd, pretend she hadn't seen him at all. But another part, a part she didn't fully understand, wanted to close the distance, to find out why he was here, and to ask the question that had haunted her for years: why did he leave? Alexandra's heart pounded as she stood frozen in place. The world around her seemed to blur, the laughter and music fading into the background. In that moment, the past and present collided, and the future hung in the balance. She didn't know what she would say, or how she would feel. All she knew was that Lucas was here, and the story they thought had ended 7 years ago might not be over after all. Session 1. The unfinished conversation. Alexandra watched as Lucas blended back into the crowd, his polished exterior once again shielding whatever emotions lay beneath. Her heart was racing, a conflicting mix of relief and frustration. She had finally broken the silence of the past 7 years. But his answers only deepened her questions. He had left her hanging, just as he had all those years ago. But this time, she wasn't going to let the conversation end like that. Determined not to lose him again, Alexandra weaved through the gathering, nodding politely to acquaintances and strangers alike. Her mind was locked on Lucas. She wouldn't let him walk away, not until they had truly spoken. She spotted him near the edge of the garden, where the party lights faded into the shadows of the surrounding trees. He was standing alone, holding a glass of something amber-colored, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He looked so different now, older, more composed, but still the same man who had once made her laugh until her sides hurt. The same man who had vanished without explanation, leaving her with nothing but memories and unanswered questions. She took a steadying breath and approached him, her heels crunching softly on the gravel path. Lucas, she called gently. He turned, his expression neutral at first. But then it shifted into something softer. He didn't seem surprised to see her. Alexandra, can we talk? She asked. Her voice firmer than she expected. Really talk? Lucas hesitated, his fingers tightening slightly around his glass. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. But then he nodded, gesturing toward a quieter spot beneath a sprawling oak tree. They walked in silence, the noise of the party fading into the background as they moved further away. When they reached the tree, Lucas leaned against the trunk, his hands in his pockets. What do you want to know? He asked, his tone guarded. Alexandra folded her arms, her eyes locked onto his. Why did you really leave? Don't give me the same vague answer. I deserve the truth. Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not that simple. It never is, Alexandra replied, her voice sharp. But that doesn't mean you get to avoid it. You left. Lucas, you disappeared without a word. Do you have any idea how that felt? His gaze dropped to the ground. I know I hurt you, he said quietly. I never wanted to, but I thought it would be better that way. Better for who? She shot back. You? Because it certainly wasn't better for me. He looked up at her then, his green eyes full of something she couldn't quite place, regret. Guilt, maybe even longing. I wasn't in a good place. He admitted, I didn't know who I was, what I wanted. I felt like I was holding you back. You decided that for me? Alexandra said, her voice rising. You didn't think I should have a say in that? Lucas winced at her words. I was young, Alex. I was scared. I thought I was doing the right thing. Well, you weren't, she snapped, the years of pain bubbling to the surface. You didn't just walk away from a relationship. Lucas, you walked away from me, from us. He was silent, his head bowed. The sight of him standing there, looking so lost, chipped away at her anger. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. Lucas, she said softly, I needed you to trust me. I needed you to let me in. But you shut me out. I know, he whispered, his voice barely audible. And I'm sorry. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She had imagined this conversation so many times, always expecting excuses or justifications. But hearing him apologize, hearing the raw regret in his voice, left her speechless. I don't expect you to forgive me. Lucas continued, I wanted you to know that leaving wasn't about you. It was about me, and I'm sorry for how I handled it. Alexandra stared at him, her emotions in turmoil. She had wanted this apology for so long. But now that she had it, she didn't know what to do with it. She wanted to yell at him, to cry, to tell him how much he had hurt her. But she also wanted to reach out and hold him, to let go of the anger that had been weighing on her heart for so many years. Lucas, she said, her voice trembling, you can't just say sorry and expect everything to be okay. I know, he said, but I had to say it. I had to try. They stood there in the stillness, the weight of their shared past hanging heavy between them. Alexandra looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who was just as lost as she was. A man who had made mistakes and was trying, in his own flawed way, to make amends. She didn't know if she could forgive him. She didn't know if she even wanted to. But for the first time in 7 years, they were talking, and that was a start. Session 2, the past revisited. The awkward silence hung in the air as Alexandra and Lucas stood under the sprawling oak tree. The party's chatter and music had long faded into the background, leaving only the sound of crickets and their uneven breaths. For a moment, Alexandra simply stared at him. 7 years of unanswered questions. 7 years of wondering what went wrong. And now here he was, present, but still feeling just out of reach. Why now? She finally asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound composed. Why come back into my life tonight, of all nights? Lucas shifted his weight, his fingers grazing the bark of the oak tree. I didn't know you'd be here, he admitted. When I saw you across the room, it felt like I couldn't leave again without talking to you. I needed to explain. Explain what? That you ran because you were scared? She shot back. That you disappeared because you didn't know what you wanted? I've already heard that. I know you have. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, his eyes flicking up to meet hers for just a second before darting away again. But there's more to it than that. I wasn't just scared, I was broken, and I didn't know how to let you see that side of me. Alexandra's brow furrowed. This was new territory. For all the hours she had spent replaying their breakup, For all the theories she'd concocted about why he had left, she had never considered this. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. Lucas exhaled, leaning his back against the tree as if the weight of his words were too heavy to hold upright. "After my dad died, I tried to act like I was fine. I told myself I could handle it, that I didn't need anyone's help. But I was a mess. Alex, I was angry all the time. I started pulling away from you because I didn't want you to see that side of me. I thought if I stayed close, I'd drag you down with me." Alexandra crossed her arms, the anger she had clung to for years slowly giving way to something more complex. "Lucas, I would have been there for you. I wanted to be there for you. I know that now." His voice was barely above a whisper. "But back then, I couldn't see it. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was doing the right thing by letting you go." Her lips tightened, and she looked away. "And what about me? What about what I needed? You didn't even give me a chance." "I know," Lucas said, his voice tinged with regret. "You're right, and I have no excuse for that. I can't change the past. All I can do is tell you the truth now and hope it helps somehow." For a long moment, Alexandra didn't respond. She glanced toward the party, where laughter and music continued unabated, as if the world hadn't tilted off its axis beneath this oak tree. She felt the familiar sting of old wounds reopening, but there was also a strange sense of relief in hearing Lucas admit his faults. It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was a step. "I still don't understand why you came tonight," she said, her voice softer now. "If you were so determined to stay out of my life, why show up here?" "I didn't come here for you," he said quickly, then winced at how harsh it sounded. "I mean, I didn't know you'd be here. A mutual friend invited me. I wasn't expecting to run into you. But when I saw you..." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "When I saw you, I realized how much I've missed you, and how much I owe you an explanation." Alexandra's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him that explanations didn't matter anymore, that she had moved on. But she knew she'd be lying. For all the time that had passed, for all the ways she had tried to fill the void he left behind. Seeing him again had stirred feelings she thought were long buried. "Do you even know how hard it was for me after you left?" she asked quietly. "I kept looking for answers that never came. I blamed myself, thinking maybe I'd done something wrong. It took me years to realize it wasn't about me at all." "I know I hurt you," Lucas said, his voice cracking, "and I've hated myself for it every day. That's why I stayed away, because I didn't think I deserved to see you again. But tonight, seeing you..." He shook his head. "I couldn't leave without telling you the truth." His vulnerability caught her off guard. The Lucas she remembered had always been confident, self-assured, the kind of person who seemed to have all the answers. This Lucas was different, still composed, but clearly struggling to hold himself together. It was both disarming and unsettling. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You can't just walk back into my life and expect me to forgive everything." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said earnestly. "I know I don't deserve that. I just needed you to know the truth. I needed to be honest with you, even if it's too late." Alexandra studied his face, searching for any sign of insincerity. But all she saw was regret, and maybe something else. Something that looked an awful lot like hope. It scared her to think that part of her wanted to believe him. Wanted to give him a chance to make things right. But she wasn't sure if she could. "You're right," she said at last. "It is too late to change what happened. But if you're serious about being honest with me now, then I need to know one more thing." "Anything," Lucas said, his voice steady. "Why didn't you tell me any of this back then?" Her tone was firmer now, her gaze unwavering. "If you cared about me, why didn't you trust me enough to let me in?" Lucas looked down, his hands clenching at his sides. "Because I didn't know how," he admitted. "I've never been good at talking about what's really going on inside me. And back then, I was even worse. I thought pushing you away would make things easier for both of us. I was wrong." Alexandra nodded slowly, his words sinking in. It wasn't the answer she had hoped for, but it was the truth, and she had spent too long chasing answers not to appreciate it now that she had it. "I don't know what happens next," she said quietly, "but if you really want to make things right, it's going to take more than words. I need time. I need to see that you mean what you say." Lucas nodded, his expression serious. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in what felt like forever, Alexandra allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. But she wasn't going to rush it. If Lucas was sincere, He would prove it, not with grand gestures or flowery apologies, but with patience, consistency, and trust. And if he wasn't, well, she had learned to live without him once before. She could do it again. Session 3. An unfinished conversation. The early morning sunlight poured through the window panes of the hotel's private lounge, bathing the room in a golden haze. Alexandra hadn't meant to arrive so early, but the restless hours before dawn had given her no other choice. She found herself there, perched on the edge of a plush velvet chair, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and running through a mental checklist of everything she needed to do before the day's engagement festivities began. It was supposed to be a quiet moment, a brief reprieve before the whirlwind of events swept her back into the chaos of polite smiles and carefully curated conversations. But that calm was short-lived. The sound of the door opening drew her attention, and her chest tightened when she saw who had entered. Lucas. He froze when he saw her, his body tense as if he was considering retreating back into the corridor. For a brief moment, they simply stared at each other. She considered leaving, too, just walking past him and pretending she hadn't seen him. But instead, she stayed, watching as he took a hesitant step inside and allowed the door to close behind him. "Morning," he said, his voice lower than it had been last night. "Morning," she replied, trying to keep her tone as neutral as possible. Lucas glanced toward the counter at the far end of the room, where an array of breakfast items sat untouched. "Mind if I?" He gestured vaguely to the coffee urn. Alexandra shook her head. "Go ahead." She watched as he poured himself a cup of coffee, his movements slow, deliberate. It was strange seeing him this way. Last night, under the dim party lights, he had seemed confident, even when he was apologizing. But now, in the stark light of morning, he looked almost unsure of himself, as though he wasn't quite sure how to approach her. "I didn't think anyone would be up this early," Lucas said as he walked toward her. He paused, hovering near a chair a few feet away. "May I?" She nodded. "Sure." He sat down carefully, as though any sudden movement might break whatever fragile truce had settled between them. Alexandra studied his face for a moment, noting the faint shadows under his eyes and the slightly rumpled appearance of his shirt. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. They sat in silence, the only sounds coming from the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of hotel staff preparing for the day. Alexandra didn't know what to say. She had spent so long imagining what she would say if she ever saw Lucas again. But now that he was here, the words escaped her. "I meant what I said last night." Lucas finally spoke, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but his hands gripped the cup a little too tightly. "I want to make things right." She stared into her coffee, watching the ripples dance across the surface. "It's not that simple, Lucas. You can't just say sorry and expect everything to go back to the way it was." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for that. I know I can't change the past. And I don't expect you to just forgive me and pretend none of it ever happened. But I need you to know that leaving was the biggest mistake of my life. And if there's any chance at all, that we can at least start over, I'll do whatever it takes." His words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Alexandra felt a flicker of something, hope, maybe, but she quickly tamped it down. She couldn't let herself get swept up in the emotion of the moment. "Not again." "Why now?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "Why are you telling me all this now? After all these years?" Lucas hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. "Because I've spent the last 7 years trying to convince myself that I did the right thing. That you were better off without me. But seeing you last night..." He looked up, his green eyes meeting hers. "It made me realize how wrong I was. I never stopped thinking about you, Alex. I never stopped caring." Her breath hitched, and she hated that he still had this effect on her. She hated that even after everything, part of her wanted to believe him, but she couldn't let herself fall back into that same pattern. "It's too late, Lucas," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't get to just walk back into my life and pick up where you left off. I've moved on. She paused, struggling to find the words. "I've learned to live without you." His face fell, and for a moment, she thought he might give up. But then he sat up straighter, determination flashing in his eyes. "I'm not asking for you to go back to the way things were," he said. "I'm asking for a chance to prove that I've changed. To prove that I'm not the same person who walked away from you." Alexandra shook her head, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. You say you change, but how do I know that's true? How do I know you won't run again the second things get tough? You don't, Lucas admitted, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. If that means starting from scratch, if that means taking things slow, then I'll do it, but I'm not walking away this time. Her heart ached at the sincerity in his voice, but she couldn't just let herself fall into his arms. Not yet. It's not just about you proving yourself, she said softly. I need time to figure out what I want. I need time to decide if I'm even ready to let you back into my life. Lucas nodded, his expression somber. I understand. I'll wait as long as you need. Alexandra looked down at her coffee, her mind spinning. She had spent so many years trying to forget him, trying to move on, and now he was here, asking for another chance. Part of her wanted to believe him, to give him the opportunity to make things right, but another part of her was still guarding the wounds he had left behind. I can't promise anything, she said finally, but if you're serious about this, if you're really willing to put in the effort, then maybe we can try to start over. Lucas's lips quirked into a small, hopeful smile. That's all I'm asking for. The room fell silent once more, but this time it felt different. The tension had shifted, giving way to a fragile sense of possibility. Alexandra didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other, one step at a time. Session 4. Unearthed Memories. It had been days since that conversation in the lounge, but Alexandra couldn't shake the weight of Lucas's words. He wanted to try again. The notion seemed impossible, yet his voice, raw and steady, echoed in her mind, stirring emotions she thought she'd buried long ago. The engagement party continued in full swing around her, a dizzying mix of laughter, clinking glasses, and distant music. In the corner of the grand ballroom, Alexandra leaned against a tall marble column, cradling a glass of champagne that she hadn't touched. Across the room, she saw Lucas chatting with a small group of guests. He was poised, confident, and at ease, yet every so often, his gaze would flicker toward her. She quickly turned her eyes elsewhere, pretending to be engrossed in a centerpiece of blooming orchids. Enjoying the festivities? A warm, familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Alexandra looked up to see her friend and confidant, Sophie, standing beside her, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. Sophie always seemed to appear at just the right moment, as though she had an uncanny sense for when Alexandra needed an anchor. Alexandra forced a smile, as much as one can, I suppose. Sophie tilted her head, her smile fading as she studied Alexandra's face. You've been off since the party started. Something tells me it has little to do with the bride and groom. Alexandra hesitated, torn between brushing it off and confiding in her friend. She opted for the truth. It's Lucas. He's here, and we've talked. Sophie's eyes widened slightly, though she quickly masked her surprise. Talked as in, he wants a second chance. Alexandra admitted, he says he's changed. Sophie regarded her carefully. And what do you think? Alexandra sighed, setting her untouched champagne on a nearby table. I don't know. I've spent 7 years convincing myself that I'm better off without him. That the life I've built is enough. But seeing him again, she trailed off, her words tangled with a mess of memories and feelings. He says all the right things. He always did, but I'm not sure if I can trust him, or if I can trust myself. Sophie reached out and placed a reassuring hand on her arm. You don't have to decide right now. Maybe it's about seeing who he is now, not who he used to be. You've both changed since then. Take the time to figure out if he's the person you'd want in your life today. Alexandra nodded, grateful for Sophie's steady presence. You always have a way of making things sound so simple. That's what friends are for, Sophie said, offering a gentle smile. And for what it's worth, I'll support you no matter what you choose. Just then, a burst of applause erupted from the center of the room. Alexandra turned to see the newly engaged couple stepping onto the dance floor for their first dance. The crowd formed a wide circle, giving them space, and Alexandra took the opportunity to slip away to the garden terrace. She needed fresh air, time to think. Outside, the crisp evening breeze was a welcome relief from the warmth and noise inside. The garden was a beautifully manicured space, with ivy-covered walls and twinkling lights strung along the hedges. Alexandra found a quiet bench near a small fountain and sat down, letting the sound of trickling water calm her nerves. She stared at the sky, The stars scattered like tiny pinpricks of light against the inky canvas. Her mind drifted to the last time she and Lucas had stargazed together. Back when they were just two young dreamers imagining a future full of promise. She remembered how he'd pointed out constellations, his voice soft and full of wonder, and how she'd leaned against his shoulder, feeling as though the world was theirs for the taking. But that was a lifetime ago. The Lucas she knew then wasn't the Lucas who had walked away without explanation, leaving her to pick up the pieces of her broken heart. And yet, she couldn't help but wonder if some part of that young man still remained. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stone path. She glanced up to see Lucas approaching, his hands in his pockets. He stopped a few feet away, hesitating as if unsure whether to come closer. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the bench. She nodded, scooting slightly to one side. "It's a free country." He sat down beside her, leaving a respectful amount of space between them. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, the faint sounds of the party drifting through the open terrace doors. "You always loved the stars," Lucas said softly, breaking the quiet. Alexandra turned her gaze back to the sky. "You remember that?" He nodded. "It's one of the things I never forgot." She felt a pang of emotion, but she quickly pushed it aside. "What are you doing out here? Shouldn't you be inside mingling?" "I needed some air," he said, his tone honest. "And, truthfully, I hoped I'd find you." Alexandra looked at him, her brow furrowing. "Why?" "Because I meant what I said. Alex, I'm not here to make things harder for you. I'm here because I can't go another day without at least trying to make this right. I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I also know that I still care about you. More than anything." His words were like a slow ache in her chest. She wanted to believe him, she truly did. But the wounds he'd left behind were deep, and healing them wouldn't be as simple as saying the right things. "I don't know if I can do this, Lucas," she said quietly. "It's not just about you proving yourself. It's about me letting you back in. And right now, I'm not sure if I can." "I understand," he replied. "All I'm asking for is the chance to show you that I've changed. I don't expect you to trust me right away. I just hope that, in time, we can figure out if there's still something here." Alexandra's gaze remained fixed on the stars, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt, longing, and fear. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: this was far from over. Session 5, Old Wounds. New Doubts. The days following their encounter on the terrace were a blur for Alexandra. She busied herself with work and social commitments, hoping to keep Lucas from occupying too much space in her thoughts. But no matter how she tried, his voice, his presence, his eyes, everything about him, lingered. It didn't help that, every so often, she'd catch sight of him in the distance at family events or mutual gatherings. Always looking effortlessly composed, always managing to catch her gaze before she could turn away. Sophie, her ever-pragmatic friend, noticed Alexandra's distractions. Over a casual lunch, Sophie leaned forward and fixed her with an expectant look. "You've been dodging my calls, Alex." Alexandra sighed, setting down her coffee. "I've just been busy. Too busy to talk to your best friend about what's really bothering you." Sophie's tone was light, but her expression was firm. "It's Lucas, isn't it?" Alexandra hesitated. I don't know what to do. "Sophie, he says he's changed, but what if he hasn't? What if I open that door again, and I end up right back where I was 7 years ago?" Sophie reached across the table and placed a reassuring hand on Alexandra's. "You're allowed to take your time, Alex. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just don't shut him out completely if there's even a part of you that still wants to see where this could go." Alexandra wanted to argue, but deep down, she knew Sophie was right. Still, knowing it and acting on it were two very different things. It was a few nights later when Alexandra found herself back at her parents' house for a small family dinner. Lucas's mother was in town, and their two families, who had always remained cordial even after the breakup, thought it would be nice to catch up. Alexandra hadn't planned on staying long, but when she arrived and saw Lucas sitting at the dining table, his smile polite but reserved, her resolve to keep the visit brief faltered. Dinner was a careful dance of small talk and reminiscing about the past. Lucas's mother told stories about his childhood, making everyone laugh, while Alexandra's father chimed in with his usual good-natured banter. The two of them, Lucas and Alexandra barely exchanged words. Though their eyes met more times than she cared to admit, it was as if they were circling each other, waiting for the right moment to bridge the gap. After dinner, as everyone drifted into the living room for dessert, Alexandra slipped out onto the back patio. The cool night air was a welcome reprieve from the warmth of the house. She leaned against the wooden railing, looking out at the darkened yard where she and Lucas had once shared countless summer evenings. "Still your favorite spot, huh?" The sound of his voice, low and familiar, made her tense. She didn't turn around. "What are you doing out here? Thought you might want some company." "Not really." Her tone was sharper than she intended. But she didn't apologize. He didn't leave. Instead, he walked to the railing and stood a few feet away, giving her space. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to. But, Alex, I meant what I said before. I'm here because I can't stop thinking about you. About us. There is no us." "Lucas." She finally faced him, her expression guarded. "Not anymore. Maybe not right now," he admitted, "but there could be." She shook her head. "You don't get to decide that. I know. I'm asking for the chance to show you that I'm not the same person who left. I was scared then, Alex. Scared of how much I felt for you. Of the pressure from my family, of everything. I handled it the wrong way. But I'm not running anymore." His honesty left her feeling exposed. She wanted to believe him, but doubt held her back. "You hurt me, Lucas. You walked away without so much as an explanation. And now you're here, expecting me to believe you've changed just because you say so? I'm not asking you to believe me right away. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove it. I know it won't be easy. And I know I have a lot to make up for. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The faint hum of crickets filled the silence as Alexandra stared at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. She found none. "I need time," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll give you all the time you need," he promised, his gaze steady and sincere. Alexandra turned back toward the yard, her thoughts a whirlwind of memories and uncertainty. She had spent years convincing herself she was fine without him, that she had moved on. But now that he was here, standing in front of her, she realized just how much of her heart she had tried to bury. As the night wore on, they stayed on the patio, talking softly, reminiscing about old times, and slowly, cautiously, beginning to navigate the fragile new connection between them. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, Alexandra allowed herself to hope, just a little, that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Session 6. Confronting the past. It had been weeks since their last real conversation. Alexandra was still unsure whether she had made the right decision by opening the door to Lucas. Even a crack. He was persistent, though, showing up at family events, finding small excuses to call, even sending her a simple text now and then, like, "Hope your day's going well," or, "Made me think of you," with a picture of something they'd once laughed about. Each time she saw his name pop up on her phone, it sent a ripple of emotion through her, nostalgia mixed with unease. Part of her longed to let herself believe he had truly changed, while the other half was braced for the disappointment she feared might follow. She told herself she had to stay strong, to keep her guard up, but Lucas was making that increasingly difficult. One afternoon, while Alexandra was working late at the nonprofit where she volunteered, she received an unexpected visitor. Lucas stood in the doorway of her small office, a bouquet of daisies in hand, her favorite. He was dressed down for once, in a simple button-down shirt and jeans, his usual polished exterior softened by an expression that was almost nervous. "Lucas," she said, setting her paperwork aside, her voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" "I know I should have called first," he admitted, stepping in and setting the flowers on her desk. "But I wanted to talk to you. In person." Alexandra glanced at the daisies, then back at him. "About what?" He shifted his weight, running a hand through his dark hair, the small gesture oddly boyish. "About us. About everything. Lucas, I know I can't keep showing up unannounced, acting like it's okay to just insert myself into your life again." He interrupted, his voice low but firm. "But I need you to understand. I'm not the same person who hurt you. I've spent years trying to prove to myself that I wasn't going to mess this up again if I ever got the chance." She folded her arms, leaning back in her chair, trying to keep her composure. Why should I believe you? His green eyes searched hers. Because I finally understand what I lost. Alex. And I'm not here to make excuses. I know I hurt you. I know I left without explaining anything. And I know I don't deserve your trust. But I'm not here to ask you to just forgive me and pretend it never happened. I'm here to do whatever it takes to earn it back. His words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Alexandra felt the walls she had so carefully built over the years begin to tremble. But she couldn't let them fall just yet. What makes you think we could even make this work again? She asked. Her voice soft but steady. You walked away once. How do I know you won't do it again? Lucas leaned forward, resting his hands on the edge of her desk. His gaze unwavering. You don't. Not yet. But I'm willing to take the time to show you that I'm staying this time. That I'm not the same guy the first was 7 years ago. I've changed. And I want to prove that to you, if you'll let me. Alexandra's heart ached at the sincerity in his voice. But she couldn't ignore the pain of the past. Lucas, you say you've changed. But how do I know this isn't just you feeling guilty? How do I know you're not just trying to ease your own conscience? He straightened, a faint shadow crossing his face. Maybe it started as guilt. But it's not about that anymore. It's about you. It's about us. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think we still had something worth fighting for. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. There was no denying the pull she still felt toward him. No denying the way her heart leapt every time he reached out. But was that enough? I need time, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not saying yes, but I'm not saying no either. I need time to figure out if I can trust you again. Lucas nodded slowly, his expression resolute. I'll wait, as long as it takes. He left the flowers on her desk, turned, and walked out of the office. Alexandra sat there, staring at the daisies, her emotions swirling. She didn't know if she could open herself up to Lucas again. Didn't know if she was ready to risk the hurt that had nearly broken her all those years ago. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Session 7. The breaking point. It started with a simple family gathering, one Alexandra's parents had been planning for weeks. She hadn't even expected Lucas to show up, considering he was a tentative presence at best in her life. But as soon as she stepped into her parents' spacious backyard and saw him standing there, talking to her younger brother, her heart sank. She wasn't ready. Not for this. Not yet. Lucas turned when he spotted her. His green eyes brightened just slightly before he quickly looked away, as if he knew she wouldn't be pleased. Alexandra steeled herself, gripping the strap of her purse tightly as she made her way toward her mother. I thought I made it clear that I needed time, she said sharply when she finally cornered him alone near the patio's edge. Her tone carried the frustration she'd been holding in since their last conversation at her office. He winced, running a hand through his hair. Alex, I'm sorry. Your mom invited me. I didn't want to seem rude by saying no. Rude? She couldn't keep the bitter edge out of her voice. So you thought it'd be less rude to just show up unannounced? Lucas sighed, his usual calm demeanor cracking under her glare. I'm trying, okay? I thought that maybe if I spent time with your family, you'd see that I'm serious about this. Serious about what? Alexandra's voice was low but sharp. Replaying history? Walking into my life like nothing happened. Like I didn't spend years wondering why you left without a word? That's not fair. Lucas stepped closer, lowering his voice. I told you, I made mistakes. But I've spent every day since trying to be better. Trying to fix what I broke. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest. You can't just fix this by showing up at a barbecue. Lucas, I know, he said, his voice softening. But what am I supposed to do? Alex? Disappear again? Pretend you don't matter to me? Because I can't do that. I won't. Her chest tightened at the raw honesty in his tone. It would have been easier if he'd been defensive, if he'd tried to justify his actions. But this quiet persistence, made her feel as though the ground beneath her feet was shifting. And she hated it, hated that she couldn't control how her heart beat faster just by being near him. I need more than words, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. You say you've changed, but I can't just take your word for it. Lucas nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this. Then let me show you. Give me one chance to prove it. She hesitated, her emotions warring within her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself hope. But she also wanted to protect herself from the devastation she'd barely survived last time. Fine, she said after a long pause. One chance, but it's not going to be easy. I wouldn't expect it to be. He replied, his expression unreadable. I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. The next few weeks passed in a strange, cautious rhythm. Lucas didn't push, he didn't force his way into her life. He called occasionally, but not too often. He sent her texts, sometimes funny, sometimes sweet, but never demanding. And when he did manage to spend time with her, it was always on her terms. He didn't try to steer the conversation toward their past, nor did he press her for answers about how she felt. Instead, he listened. At first, it caught Alexandra off guard. She'd expected him to be more assertive, to bombard her with grand declarations of love. But Lucas seemed determined to let her set the pace. He didn't pressure her to forgive him overnight. He didn't ask for guarantees. He simply showed up, patient, steady, and quietly attentive. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Alexandra found herself replying to one of his texts with an uncharacteristically candid response. It's been rough. Honestly, everything feels off lately, like I can't keep up. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. I'm sorry you're feeling that way. Is there anything I can do? His reply was so straightforward, so genuine, that it caught her off guard. No attempts to fix her problems. No unsolicited advice, just a simple offer of support. For the first time in weeks, Alexandra felt a flicker of something resembling comfort. But not everyone was thrilled about Lucas's reappearance. One evening, Alexandra's best friend Sophie pulled her aside. Concern etched into her features. I don't understand why you're even giving him another chance, she said bluntly. He broke your heart, Alex, and now he just waltzes back in. Expecting what? Forgiveness? I don't know what he expects, Alexandra admitted. All I know is that he's trying. Sophie raised an eyebrow. Trying? Alex, come on, you're too smart for this. People don't change that much. Maybe they don't, Alexandra said, her voice quieter. But what if he has? What if I'm the one who's too scared to see it? Her own words surprised her. She hadn't even admitted that possibility to herself until now. Sophie sighed, placing a hand on her shoulder. Just promise me you'll be careful. Don't let him hurt you again. I won't, Alexandra said firmly, though she wasn't entirely sure if she was reassuring Sophie or herself. It wasn't until their first real date since the reunion that Alexandra began to see the depth of Lucas's effort. They met at a quiet, cozy restaurant, nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, the kind of place that felt unassuming and personal. Lucas showed up with no grand gestures, no sweeping speeches. He just brought himself, vulnerable, genuine, and ready to listen. Over the course of the evening, Alexandra found herself opening up more than she had in years. She told him about her struggles at work, her fears of failure, and her doubts about their future. Lucas didn't interrupt or offer solutions. He simply listened, nodding at the right moments and meeting her gaze with a calm sincerity. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't shy away from his own past mistakes. I don't blame you for not trusting me, he said. I didn't trust myself back then. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving. But all I did was hurt the person I cared about most. His words lingered in the air, raw and unpolished. Alexandra couldn't deny that they stirred something deep within her, a mixture of anger, sadness, and a tiny spark of hope. I don't know if we can get back what we had, she said finally, but maybe it's worth trying. Lucas's expression softened, his lips curving into a faint, almost disbelieving smile. That's all I want, a chance. And for the first time in a long time, Alexandra let herself imagine the possibility that he really had changed. Session 8. A Reckoning of Hearts. Alexandra's decision to give Lucas a chance had not gone unnoticed. Her close-knit circle of friends and family had taken various positions, some cautious, others outright skeptical. Yet despite the doubts surrounding her, she had begun to feel the faint stirrings of something she thought she had lost entirely: hope. It wasn't perfect, of course. She and Lucas were still figuring out how to be in the same room without the weight of their past overshadowing every conversation. But over the past few weeks, a rhythm had started to form. Lucas had made it clear he was willing to take things slow, to earn back her trust. And that steady patience had begun to wear down her defenses. Bit by bit, her anger had started to give way to something she hadn't felt in years: curiosity. Their interactions became more frequent and more comfortable. They started meeting after work for coffee at her favorite corner cafe. A modest place that felt far removed from the turbulence of their shared history. Here, amidst the hum of espresso machines and the scent of fresh pastries, Alexandra began to see glimpses of the Lucas she had once loved. He was attentive, thoughtful, and, above all, present. It was as if he had taken her years of silence and carefully listened to every word she hadn't spoken. But the path toward reconciliation was not without its hurdles. One of the first real tests came when Alexandra's sister Emily invited her over for a small family dinner. Emily had always been fiercely protective of Alexandra, and the moment she learned that Lucas was back in the picture, she wasted no time in pulling her older sister aside for a private talk. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked, her arms crossed as she leaned against the kitchen counter. Her tone was firm but not unkind. "No," Alexandra admitted, "but I think I need to find out." Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "I just don't want to see you get hurt again. You were a mess after you left." "Alex, I'm not saying people can't change. But, I know," Alexandra interrupted gently. "I know what I went through. And I don't know where this will end up. But it feels different this time." Emily studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Okay, but if he screws up again, I'll personally track him down and make him regret it." The following evening, Lucas came to pick Alexandra up for dinner. When he arrived at her apartment, she hesitated before opening the door. Despite their recent progress, the thought of introducing him to Emily and her family filled her with anxiety. She didn't doubt Lucas's sincerity, but she couldn't shake the fear that one wrong word or lingering glance could unravel everything they'd worked toward. When she finally let him in, Lucas immediately picked up on her unease. "Hey," he said softly, tilting his head to meet her gaze. "You okay?" "Just nervous," she admitted. "My sister is very protective." He gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I'll be on my best behavior." She wanted to tell him that wouldn't matter. That Emily's opinion was based on his past actions rather than anything he said or did tonight. But she kept the thought to herself, knowing it wouldn't help either of them. Dinner turned out to be less tense than Alexandra had feared. Emily was cordial, if not overly warm, and her parents seemed happy enough to see Lucas again. Still, the evening felt like a test, and Alexandra couldn't help but feel the weight of every exchanged glance, every measured response. By the time they left, she was emotionally drained. "Your family's nice," Lucas said once they were back in his car, heading toward her apartment. "They're protective," Alexandra said, not sure how else to put it. "That's not a bad thing," Lucas replied, his tone thoughtful. "It means they care." She glanced at him, caught off guard by the softness in his voice. For a moment, the tension of the evening melted away, and she allowed herself to believe, just for a second, that this might actually work. The next few weeks brought more changes, and with them, more challenges. Alexandra started to notice little things about Lucas that felt both familiar and unfamiliar. The way he laughed at her terrible jokes, the way he listened when she needed to vent about work, and the way he looked at her, like she was still the most important person in the world. But there were also signs of the man he had become in the years they'd been apart. He was more grounded, more deliberate in his words and actions. It was as if he had taken the time away from her to truly grow into himself. Still, not everything was smooth sailing. There were moments when old wounds reopened, when the pain of his past decisions resurfaced. One night, after a long day at work, Alexandra found herself snapping at him over something trivial, a comment he made about her workload. The argument that followed wasn't explosive, but it left her feeling raw and uncertain. "I'm sorry," Lucas said afterward, his voice quiet but firm. "I shouldn't have said that." She looked away, her arms crossed tightly. "It's not just that, it's everything. Sometimes I feel like we're just waiting for the past to come back and ruin this." "It won't," he said. "I won't let it." "But how can you be so sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do we know this isn't just temporary?" "Because I'm not going anywhere," Lucas said, stepping closer. "I know I can't change what happened before, but I can choose to be here now, to be better, and that's what I'm going to do. Alex, for as long as you'll let me." His words hung in the air, and for the first time in years, Alexandra felt a glimmer of certainty. Maybe it wouldn't be easy. Maybe they would have to face more arguments, more doubts, and more hurdles, but at that moment, she knew she wanted to keep trying. Lucas wasn't just someone from her past. He was someone who had chosen to come back, to show her that he was willing to fight for a future together. And for Alexandra, that was enough. Session 9. The Cost of Happiness. The tension that had been building for weeks finally boiled over in a moment Alexandra had dreaded but known was inevitable. On a chilly Friday evening, she found herself seated across from her parents at their dining table. Their expressions a mix of concern and quiet judgment. She had tried to put this off as long as possible, hoping that time would lessen their disapproval. But there was no avoiding it any longer. They needed to know, and she had to face their reaction. "You're seeing him again," her mother said, her voice steady but edged with disappointment. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "Yes," Alexandra replied, doing her best to maintain her composure. "I am." Her father leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "Alexandra, after everything he put you through." "I know," she interrupted. "I know what he did. I haven't forgotten any of it. But he's changed. He's trying. Trying isn't always enough," her mother said softly. "Sometimes people can't undo the damage they've done, no matter how hard they try." Alexandra bit her lip. She wanted to defend Lucas, to list every reason why he was worth giving a second chance. But she knew her parents weren't ready to hear it. Instead, she leaned forward and said, "I need to figure this out on my own. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm asking for your understanding." Her mother looked at her father, who sighed deeply but said nothing more. That silence was enough to let Alexandra know they weren't convinced. When she left their house that evening, the cold air hit her like a slap. She pulled her coat tighter around her, trying to shake off the sting of their words. As much as she wanted to pretend their opinions didn't matter, they did. She wanted their support, or at the very least, their willingness to accept her choice. But it seemed that acceptance was going to take more time than she had hoped. Lucas was waiting for her at the cafe where they had started meeting regularly. When she walked in, he looked up from his seat by the window, his expression immediately shifting from neutral to concerned. "How did it go?" he asked as she slid into the seat across from him. Alexandra hesitated, then sighed. "About as well as I expected." "I'm sorry," Lucas said quietly. "It's not your fault," she replied, stirring her coffee even though she wasn't planning on drinking it. They still see you as the guy who broke my heart." "Maybe I'll always be that guy to them," Lucas said, his gaze dropping to the table. "Or maybe they'll change their minds," Alexandra said, her voice softer now. "It's just going to take time." Lucas nodded but didn't look up. For a moment, they sat in silence, the faint hum of conversation around them providing a comforting background noise. Then Lucas spoke again. "I don't want to make things harder for you," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "If this is too much." "No," Alexandra interrupted firmly. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to tell me what's too much for me to handle. That's my decision." Lucas's lips quirked into a faint smile. "Fair enough." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm not giving up on this. On us. My parents don't have to approve for me to know that this is worth fighting for." He squeezed her hand gently. "You're sure?" "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time," she said, and for once, she meant it. The following weeks weren't easy. There were still plenty of moments when Alexandra doubted herself, when she questioned whether rebuilding something so broken was worth the effort. But then there were also moments when those doubts faded, when Lucas did something small but meaningful. Like remembering her favorite dessert or sending her an encouraging text before a big meeting. Those were the moments that reminded her why she had chosen to give him another chance. But as they moved forward, one particular obstacle loomed larger than any other: the past. Alexandra couldn't help but think about the pain Lucas had caused. The nights she had spent crying. The friendships she had strained by refusing to admit how much she was hurting. And though Lucas was doing everything in his power to prove he had changed, there were times when she wondered if the past would always cast a shadow over their present. One such moment came during a dinner party with mutual friends. It was the first time they had attended a social event as a couple since reuniting. And Alexandra had been on edge all night. She could feel the whispers, the sideways glances, the quiet judgments from people who still remembered what had happened 7 years ago. At one point, she caught a snippet of conversation between two acquaintances in the kitchen. "Can you believe they're back together?" one of them said. "Honestly, no," the other replied. "She deserves so much better." Alexandra's stomach twisted. She wanted to march into the kitchen and confront them, to defend her decision, but instead she stayed frozen in place, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. When she returned to the living room, Lucas immediately noticed her pale face and tense posture. "What happened?" he asked quietly, leaning in so only she could hear. "Nothing," she said, forcing a smile. "I'm fine." Lucas frowned, clearly not convinced, but he didn't press her. Instead, he simply wrapped an arm around her shoulders and gave her a reassuring squeeze. And though it didn't erase her anger or hurt, it made her feel less alone. That night, as they walked home, Alexandra finally broke the silence. "Do you think it's always going to be like this?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps on the pavement. Lucas glanced at her, his expression serious. "What do you mean? People judging us, whispering behind our backs, thinking I'm making a mistake." Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her. "I don't know," he admitted. "I can't control what people think or say. But I do know that I'm not going to stop trying to prove to you that this is worth it." Alexandra looked up at him, her breath visible in the cold night air. "Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one fighting for this." "You're not," Lucas said firmly. "I'm fighting too. I know I can't erase the past. But I'm doing everything I can to make sure our future is different. I just need you to believe that." She studied his face, searching for any sign of doubt or insincerity. But all she saw was the man she had once loved, the man who had made mistakes but was trying to be better. And in that moment, she made a decision. "I do believe you," she said quietly. "I just hope it's enough." "It will be," Lucas said. "I promise." And as they continued walking, hand in hand, Alexandra felt a small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Session 10. Second Chances. As Alexandra and Lucas stepped into the art gallery, the soft hum of classical music and the low murmur of voices greeted them. It was the first public event they were attending together since their reconciliation. And Alexandra's stomach fluttered with nerves. Lucas must have sensed her unease because he gently brushed his hand against hers. A silent reminder that she wasn't alone. "You're going to love this exhibit," Lucas said, his tone casual but warm. "I know how much you've missed painting." Alexandra managed a small smile. Painting had been her refuge during the years when Lucas was out of her life. And now, being here with him, surrounded by vivid canvases and carefully curated sculptures, felt both surreal and oddly comforting. They wandered through the gallery, pausing to admire the works that caught their attention. Alexandra found herself relaxing, her earlier nerves giving way to quiet enjoyment. She had always loved art for its ability to tell stories, to capture emotions that words often couldn't. And as she moved from piece to piece, she couldn't help but think about how far she and Lucas had come. At one point, they stopped in front of a particularly striking painting, a bold, abstract piece that seemed to explode with color and movement. Alexandra tilted her head, studying it intently. "This one's called Rebirth," Lucas said, reading the placard beside it. "Seems fitting, don't you think?" She turned to him, surprised by his insight. "Yeah," she said softly. "It does." Lucas smiled, and for a moment, they simply stood there, side by side, letting the painting's vibrant energy wash over them. It was as if the artwork was a mirror, reflecting their own journey, messy, chaotic, but ultimately full of hope. After the gallery, they walked to a nearby cafe. The cool evening air wrapped around them, but neither seemed to notice. They talked about the exhibit, about the artist's choices and techniques. And for the first time in weeks, Alexandra felt a sense of ease. It was as if they were simply two people enjoying each other's company, free from the weight of their history. As they sipped their coffee, Lucas's expression turned serious. "Alex," he began, setting his cup down, "I know it hasn't been easy. But I want you to know how much I appreciate you giving me another chance." Alexandra looked at him, her heart tightening. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted, "but I think we're starting to figure it out." Lucas reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I don't take any of this for granted," he said. "Not you, not us. I know I have a lot to make up for, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." She squeezed his hand, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I know you are, and that's why I'm here." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the cafe's warm glow and soft chatter cocooning them. For the first time, Alexandra allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were finally on the right path. Over the next few months, their relationship began to feel less like a fragile truce and more like a real partnership. They learned to navigate their differences, to communicate openly, and to trust each other again. It wasn't perfect, there were still disagreements and moments of doubt, but they faced those challenges together, determined not to let their past define their future. Alexandra started painting again, finding inspiration not only in her art classes but also in her life with Lucas. He encouraged her to share her work, and she found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. Her art became a reflection of her journey, a blend of pain, growth, and newfound joy. Lucas, too, made changes. He took on a project that aligned with his values, dedicating his resources and expertise to supporting local artists. For him, it was a way of not only rebuilding his reputation but also contributing something meaningful to the community. Alexandra saw the transformation in him, the way he approached his work with renewed purpose, the way he treated people with more patience and understanding. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their shared apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below, Alexandra leaned her head on Lucas's shoulder. "I never thought we'd get here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Me neither," Lucas admitted, "but I'm glad we did." She smiled, closing her eyes as the breeze brushed against her face. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of the city and the steady beat of Lucas's heart, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Their journey wasn't over. They still had work to do, both individually and as a couple. But for the first time, Alexandra felt like they were truly moving forward. They had taken their broken pieces and pieced them back together, creating something new, something stronger. As the night deepened, Alexandra thought about the painting they had seen at the gallery, the one called Rebirth. She realized now just how fitting it had been. Their story wasn't about erasing the past or pretending it hadn't happened. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward together. And that, she knew, was the greatest second chance of all. A new beginning. As Alexandra sat in her small art studio, she stared at the blank canvas in front of her. The sunlight poured in through the wide windows, casting a warm glow on her work table scattered with brushes, tubes of paint, and unfinished sketches. In her mind, the swirl of colors that would soon grace the canvas began to take shape: bold, vibrant hues that reflected the life she was building. It had been months since she and Lucas decided to take that leap of faith together. In that time, they had learned to accept the imperfections in themselves and in each other. They had learned to forgive, not just the mistakes, but the fears and insecurities that had once held them back. More importantly, they had learned how to trust in the love they shared. Lucas had become her greatest supporter, not only in her art but in her desire to teach and inspire others. His encouragement had given her the confidence to open her studio to students, allowing her to pass on the passion that had sustained her through the darkest times. She no longer hesitated when someone asked to see her work. Instead, she stood tall, knowing that each brushstroke told a story of resilience, hope, and transformation. For Lucas, the changes were just as profound. He'd shifted his career focus, dedicating himself to projects that brought him fulfillment rather than fleeting success. The work he did now had real meaning, supporting local businesses, funding art initiatives, and partnering with community organizations. His drive was no longer fueled by the need to prove himself to others, but by the desire to make a genuine difference. One of their greatest joys had been finding ways to intertwine their worlds. Together, they hosted events that celebrated art and culture, combining Alexandra's creative vision with Lucas's organizational acumen. They had turned Lucas's once corporate gala into an annual arts fundraiser, raising funds for emerging artists and creating a space where creativity and community could flourish. And yet, it wasn't just the big accomplishments that defined their new life together. It was the quiet, everyday moments, the evenings spent cooking dinner and laughing over a glass of wine, the mornings walking hand in hand through the park, the whispered words of encouragement on days when doubts crept in. These small, tender instances were the foundation of their love, the proof that their journey had been worth every struggle. As Alexandra dipped her brush into the first color and made the initial stroke on the canvas, she couldn't help but smile. The painting was still abstract in her mind, but she knew it would be vibrant, full of light and motion, just like her relationship with Lucas. Every line and color would carry a piece of their story, And when it was complete, it would stand as a testament to the life they had built. Because for Alexandra and Lucas, their love wasn't just about finding each other again. It was about the life they created together, the home they made from the fragments of their past, and the future they faced side by side. It was a reminder that no matter how broken things might seem, love has the power to heal, to rebuild, and to transform. This was their new beginning, and they were ready to embrace it together. Thank you for watching today's CEO Love Stories. Every love story is a journey, one filled with passion, ambition, sacrifice, and unforgettable moments. Here at CEO Love Stories, we bring you the most compelling tales where power, success, and love collide. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget, like to support more incredible content. Comment your thoughts. Can love overcome power and ambition? Subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss our next breathtaking romance. CEO Love Stories, where love and power collide. Because love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. See you in the next story.